Brilliant. Okay, I'll explain what WorkOS is in a second, and I'll try and do this pretty quick to save times and keep some energy so we can get back to some meat of it. But the story that I deal with every day, that is kind of the question that keeps me up at night, is everyone's obviously excited for MCP, but what does it take to actually bring it into the enterprise? Lots of companies are trying to build internal MCP servers to serve their employees or make an externally facing tool, sell a SaaS into a company using MCP. But this is not obvious how you get from a scrappy little local server into the enterprise. Kind of the core reason for this is that most MCP servers so far have been for developers, right? GitHub is a perfect example. We also, we don't have a massive risk tolerance, but we know when things go wrong. We kind of understand how the cookie gets made. And so we're really fast to adopt. We're seeing some more consumer MCP servers, apps SDK servers that are, nice. People understand them. People are willing to adopt them. They get confused if things go wrong, but it's okay. Problem is enterprises. They take forever to adopt technology, and they also have a very low risk tolerance. So you need strong security around that. So what does that mean? I hope everyone's heard the S for MCP stands for secure, that was being spoken at the start of MCP. I think MCP has gotten much more secure, but I still think this is a very funny joke to be made. So security means lots and lots of things. The one that I will talk about is the part where you try and connect your AI agent to the MCP server, and you want to limit that with really robust OAuth in between. API keys are very useful, and there's lots of context in which API keys are powerful, especially for long-running MCP servers. But there's a reason to protect to your server with OAuth. One, API keys for normal people don't make sense. Everyone here kind of gets an API key, but if you want your mum to install an MCP server, I mean, maybe a really cool developer mum, but like in general, they don't want to go and find an API key in the GitHub, in the settings, developer, something. They want to click a button that says, I approve this MCP server. It's also really useful when you have a registry, when you have these marketplaces. GitHub, as part of VS Code, has a registry of servers that you can use. Claude is working on their marketplace. Eventually, OpenAI might come out with one. It just makes a lot more sense when you're connecting an MCP to click connect, approve, and then have the MCP. It's a much better onboarding flow. It's a standard experience that everyone's used to, and increasingly clients expect or even require it. Admission to certain marketplaces and registries requires you to have OAuth because it is just a pain-free way of connecting to systems. It's got good security properties. We can run really nice unit tests on it. With API keys, it's harder to enforce security. A lot of the security is done on your server-side backend, so it's hard for a marketplace to enforce that. That's my pitch on why you should go with OAuth and not API keys, admitting that opening up to DCR is deeply, deeply, deeply painful. The other thing to note, the OpenAI Apps SDK recommends, I think strongly recommends OAuth and might even require it.
Yeah, I think it
And so
requires it now.
You're just, someone in your org is going to be like, we need DCI, we need client ID metadata, and that is deeply painful, and you're going to have to fight that fight to get it out. I do a lot of fighting this fight. There's not just that, but if you've ever tried to build enterprise authentication infrastructure, there's a lot of complexity to it. There is SSO and SAML. GitHub's a great OpenID Connect provider. You need to make sure you integrate with that. As your agents connect to things, there's ideas of agent identities. There's a bunch of work from identity providers on agent identities and how you provision or deprovision them, and you need enterprise-grade audit logs. Sam talked about a bunch of this being in the GitHub MCP. I work for WorkOS. I have two jobs. I'm the head of AI agents for WorkOS, and I am also a research fellow at Stanford, where we do like agent reliability research. WorkOS is a security vendor. We do auth, but also a whole bunch of enterprise tooling to help SaaS companies scale into the enterprise. Everything from bot blocking that protects Cursor's API endpoints to really complex permissioning infrastructure, key management, that syncs with enterprise key management systems. Our customers speak for ourselves. We power all of Cursor's identity access management and security, all their bot blocking, all their key management. We power all enterprise integrations for OpenAI and Anthropic and Perplexity and a bunch of others. And our job is to take these new AI startups that want to sell an MCP server and give them an OAuth wrapper that works really well, that supports all of the latest spec changes, that is ready to scale into the enterprise, that supports SAML and SSO, so that folks don't have to spend weeks of their lives figuring out what dynamic client registration actually means. And then dealing with the inevitable security vulnerabilities it introduces. We will onboard that, we will handle that risk for you and make it easier to build an MCP server. We have our MCP product that is super cool. So genuine offer. If you want to talk about the OAuth part of this stack, I care a lot about it. I have a lot of thought about agents' identities. And so reach out. This is, of course, paired with a lot of complexity that comes with OAuth, but also unlocks. You are using, Sam, URLs to customize the behavior of MCP servers. One way you can do this is just role-based access control. If you have really nice OAuth and scopes, you can change the behavior of servers, and you don't have to get a new URL. You can just connect and reconnect and have a changed state or do a new list tools. And so I think the one part of that GitHub story that we didn't have is how does OAuth interact with this? And so now let's talk about tool bloat and all the fun that comes along with how you design these systems. Unless Sam, you are.
Tobin, I'm very curious about identity in this context because part of the thing that like the exploit that Sam you had mentioned was really the fact that the agent assumes the identity of the developer, and so the exploits that would work on like my CLI because I have like my private key or like my PAT available would also work in the MCP case for agents. So I guess Tobin, like, how do you think about agent identity versus user identity?
So agent identity is, like, I think, a genuinely very important topic, and it is way too overloaded as a concept because there's everything from the client identity. So what client am I interacting with? Cursor? Am I interacting with VS Code? Am I interacting with Claude? Which currently right now is chaos because of dynamic client registration, but is fixed and made more verifiable with client ID metadata. But that's just client information as to what you're connecting to.
Yeah.
There is a secondary thing of what is this agent? Like, what is that? I'm connected to Claude or Claude Code. What kind of Claude? What is Claude Code's intent here? And so all of the identity providers, the Okta, Entra, etc., Bing Identity, all want to have robust notions of like managing your AI inventory and having identities assigned to agents. So I think there is a lot of work that is ongoing and completely unsolved as to how you tie the agents you spin up to concrete identifiers that are communicated to MCP servers to do robust enterprise-grade logging. And that's not really an answer to the question. It's just, it's a really big open challenge that is ongoing.
I'm curious what you think about this as well. Like GitHub, for example, the Copilot coding agent, when it does stuff, it specifically shows on behalf of, and I really like that. But it feels like most APIs and most things that exist don't have a space for that yet. Like, is that something that we can see?
Yeah. So on behalf of is kind of, there's three ways you can do a flow. You can have a separate identity for an agent. You can have a just impersonate your user identity, or you can have an on behalf of flow. And it's great, and we support a bunch of it, and lots of identity providers are excited to use it with agents, but a lot of folks don't support on behalf of. And if your upstream provider doesn't support on behalf of flows, there's not much you could do. So it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of abuse of systems from agents, and then maybe we'll support it more.
Yeah. I'm actually curious on that front. So as things stand, how do you think about like auth from the MCP perspective versus auth from like a standard identity provider that exists? Like, what's the special sauce here that you think really makes a difference for MCP?
Yeah, I mean, we've always had login boxes, right? Like, this is not a new thing. You've been logging in for a while. You've been, signing with Google for quite some time now. The difference is that in order to have really nice connections for our agents, you need to support MCP type things, which is just weird. Dynamic client registration is weird. We've never seen that before. Resource indicators, not super common. Client ID metadata, brand new. These are all kind of, we've found this graveyard of specs and we've thrown them in. And that's a lot of additional work
Yeah.
for identity access management teams, which is why a lot of the auth vendors are trying to provide custom solutions to help people move faster. Because I hate seeing a YC company spinning up an MCP server and then they're taking their very limited time and burning a week on it on like
Exactly.
Claude code vibe coding auth infrastructure, only to
That's the
find
one
out
thing
that
you
like the
probably don't
spec
want to
doesn't
vibe
support.
code.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and it's tough. Yeah,
Yeah.
great question.
So, one last question on that, and not to belabor the point, do you think this is like something that an OAuth 3.0 kind of spec would cover as like an identity for like AI systems more prominently, or is this something that should be part of MCP going forward in a more fundamental way? Because MCP is bound by like upstream auth, like you said.
Yeah. I'm co-chair of one of the OpenID Foundation's agent like AI working groups. And OAuth 2 and OAuth 2.1 caused so much drama by calling it 2 and 2.1 that calling something OAuth 3, I think will terrify so many people and lead to so much debate that we will solve AGI before we ever have OAuth 3. That said, I think we will see a lot of incremental problem solving. Each of the identity vendors, Okta, Ping, Entra, have different notions of agents, and they're just going to ship products, and then everyone's going to find out how they can kind of move around them. We got WebBot Auth, which allows you to identify bots in the web,
Hmm.
and lots of tooling. And I think all of this will organically emerge, and there'll be a lot of chaos and a lot of patchwork of solutions, and then we will end up with kind of what we end up.
It'll be more organic than like a concerted effort. That makes sense. Sam, on something related to this that I was curious about is, are you seeing any really interesting use cases of the GitHub MCP server that like you've seen out in the wild?
Interesting use cases. It's funny actually because I was just yesterday, I think, looking at a list of interesting OAuth apps that have connected to us, and like the diversity and some of the amount of connections are really, really interesting. Like one of the earliest ones actually was from Anthropic's team had a GitHub action that they were building that had access to the GitHub MCP as part of it, for example. Um, like there's, some people are using it in kind of ways that seem like they're probably automated rather than with agents as well. But yeah, I'm trying to think if I've seen anything like truly weird. I mean, one of my favorites is to get it to like uh so there's a prompt in it that allows you to trigger Copilot coding agent and it just pulls down a bunch of issues from the repo and it tries to rank sort of which ones it thinks an agent could do a good job of
Hmm.
and then just assigns them all to coding agent. Like it's pretty raw, but like I've
That's
done that even in live demos and stuff. And like then because there's got the Playwright MCP on coding agent as well as GitHub's one, like you can see often screenshots of. So like I often tell it to like redesign this website in like a bunch of like weird themes, and then yeah, like I don't know. For me, like it's really enjoyable. And then also agents are fantastic at like that stuff that I think is a really niche skill, like really great mermaid charts, for example. Like GitHub has great support for mermaid chart rendering, but it's actually like it's easy to make basic charts, but making really complex ones is quite time consuming. But telling an agent to like just spit out like I might, I'll even link in a thread one of the last ones I did. But yeah, like it's really fascinating watching it just spit out issues that are enhanced with like really unusual kind of chart.
very cool. Um, that actually reminds me, one of the things Tobin you said was one of the reasons for OAuth is also that right now MCP is still probably very developer centric. It's very hard to use for like folks who are just regular people. And I'm curious if you think MCP servers in general will just be like subsumed by like a layperson may just use an agent, and the agent in turn may use an MCP server or a handful of MCP servers, and I may just interact with the MCP server by way of auth or like some kind of like giving my access or identity permissions, but I may never even know that an MCP server is involved in the process beyond that. Is that how you see this evolving going forward, in terms of like who interacts with these servers at the end of the day?
Yeah. I mean, I can really see a future where you're using Claude, and in the same way that Claude says you ask a question and it goes and it searches the web a couple times. Maybe it goes and
Yeah.
searches your Google Drive. You barely even notice that it's going and using these things, and it just comes to you with a result. Is that
Yeah.
over time your Claude is connected to, and it's connected to your Zillow, and it's connected to your Gmail, and it's connected to your Amazon account. And when you ask it to do things, it just goes and does stuff. It pulls in relevant
Right.
information from kind of a consumer perspective. From a developer perspective, Claude uses MCP servers, Claude Code uses MCP servers all the time without my knowledge. Like I'll often just be on my computer and like Chrome will pop up. Like, it's like, we're doing a playwright. I don't remember what I ran, but like, golly gosh, like, and it's just going and using the GitHub MCP. And I'm not really paying attention. I've tabbed out and I'm on Twitter. So I do think we're going to abstract ourselves away a little bit from this.
Yeah. Sebastian had another interesting question around that. So how do you deal with situations where the agent and MCP are owned by separate parties? For example, a user prompts a remote agent of some company that wants to call an MCP by another provider. What do you authenticate and with whom?
Yeah, this is a deeply challenging problem. So OAuth is great. It has lots of problems. What you're describing where you're giving consent to a remote access point is really painful. You can just pass the URL, but these systems are not designed, like there are protections against that, which makes it harder. Although kind of consent flows are designed to give access to third-party things. You've always had Calendly access to Google Calendar. It's designed for third-party access. That said, this can be a really problem in, for example, a GitHub action where it's not necessarily stateful. Like an API key actually makes a lot more sense here than a user consent flow OAuth. There are OAuth versions called M2M, machine-to-machine, client credentials type OAuth flows, which have nice enterprise-grade security without needing an API key. But yeah, this is challenging, and you're going to waste so much time like moving around these tokens and URLs to get all the OAuth flows orchestrated. But it's worth it.
There's like a subtle level as well that's like not even just auth, but which is already a hard enough layer to solve, but nuances of privacy in data, there's some really subtle examples. Because I've been working a little bit with Den. Like I have an issue that I haven't created a SEP yet for, but that was trying to add on a sort of response annotations model for data that's private or what have you, or from a public source, so that you can kind of tell when they're intersecting. But there's all sorts of huge challenges there. And I get one of the great examples someone kind of countered a suggestion I made with was that like you imagine an email server and sure, don't post my private email to like a GitHub issue or something like that. But there's even internally you've got this problem of don't my CEO has been emailing me about impending layoffs. I work in HR or something. Do not send that out across company. There's all these kind of privacy boundaries that are more like, if anyone remembers the whole Google sort of circles social media kind of concept where there's it didn't get the traction possibly deserved.
Yeah.
But it's we have all these kind of almost Venn diagrams going off into the whole world of different privacy domains. And even if you can work out who the identity that's acting is and marry that up against each of these different services, you still have an extra layer of thresholds that aren't even static. Because for example, once the layoffs have been announced, then you couldn't tell from the email the state of the outside world either. So I think these problems are really interesting, and I'm glad that people like Tobin are putting a lot of thought into them. But I think we have to also be pragmatic of like, well, what can we actually solve today that makes it better? Like maybe you should, if you're talking to the CEO about layoffs, maybe you should have confirmations on tool calls that are dealing with your emails, right? Like
That actually reminds me. We've talked a lot about tool calls, and I think when most people talk about MCP servers, it is through about like we talk about tools. What do you folks think about resources and maybe prompts to a lesser extent? But like like, because resources are almost like these URI identifiers that relate to data. And how do you think of auth for resources, but also generally like maybe Sam, does the GitHub MCP server use resources at all yet, or is
yes.
it? Oh,
We've
okay.
had we've actually had template resources from the start, but they didn't have the completions API, and then the MCP Go SDK didn't have it for ages. So I actually built a working prototype with VS Code who do support it, and I don't think I'm not even sure if we've got it live yet. But anyway, so uh, David, like DSP, who uh, was a co-creator of MCP, was talking about this at the MCP Dev Summit in London recently, but like he's quite disappointed with the implementation of resources thus far, and I
Uh,
agree wholeheartedly. Like, so we have a get tool, like sorry, a get file tool in GitHub's MCP server, but we also have template resources that can access all files you have available on all of GitHub, like based on your token.
yeah.
And I don't understand why host applications can't let the agent somehow navigate this and access any
Yeah.
of those files. And not just access them, but not stuff them into context, put them through a RAG pipeline or allow a grep tool on them in a temp file, or
Mm.
like do something that means that the agent's context doesn't get blown, but that the agent can autonomously use them to kind of further its goals. So I
I,
believe there's more to see.
I also really second that, and I think the problem is in the client implementation side to not support these things. So VS Code is amazing; it supports all of the features, but
Yep.
something like elicitation is like a very few clients actually support it, and I think
Yep.
this comes down to anytime there is a clear use case for one of these things, it seems to push clients to support it. So resources, no one supported resources super well. I think now that ChatGPT's Apps SDK uses resources to send the UI component, but also
Yeah.
you can just return text as part of that. It means that a lot of clients will be forced to support resources because servers will put resources up to support ChatGPT. And I think we're going to have to see this chicken and egg with every single one of the features that aren't tools until clients actually support them.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like we're kind of like um, we need a flagship client that really does a lot of these things and pushes MCP to the limits. Resources for me is also an interesting one because it can be used for agents to interact with that data, but also obviously for like users to like application level use cases as well to access that data. Um, I guess one of the other questions I had, and I think Subhankar kind of touched upon this as well, is can you share some experiences deploying MCP in production for enterprise? And Sam, I think you had mentioned like uh, I'm guessing Helm charts or ways of like setting up the Kubernetes cluster, and then you have monitoring and a Redis session store going on. What are some of the, is it standard services, distributed systems infrastructure, or is there anything specific that is MCP specific here?
So yeah, the majority of it is standard kind of GitHub Go service. Um, and again, like the OAuth is very prescriptive about the URLs that, like things like well-known URLs and that kind of thing live. So there's some patterns that are just ultra kind of like rigid, and that's good. Like they should be. Uh, Also, there's some confusion about some of those specs. Like for example, after the well-known URL, there should like if you use multiple URLs for different configurations, things like that, that should be appended rather than like I've seen people try to prepend it and put the well-known at the end. and things like that. Like there's subtleties to implementing it right. So like rereading and rereading the spec when you implement it is, I guess, my top bit of advice, especially for the auth stuff. But with OAuth, generally, if you've done it wrong, it just won't work, which is good. That's a feature for auth. Um, but yeah, no, uh, I think that SDKs supporting hooks is the most kind of MCP specific thing
Hmm.
that like is you, especially because it's a JSON RPC payload. What you don't want, which we have had to do a bunch of times for different reasons, you don't want to double parse the JSON RPC payload because it's just kind of wasteful of resources. Like
Mm.
it's not so expensive that you can't, but like it's nicer if you can hit the
Yeah.
SDK, it can parse the payload, and then you can look at like the type of access it was. So yeah, I think like where we can, a lot of our stuff happens like life cycle logging, things like that. Obviously, like we do log when things hit servers and right from the start, but we add the specific tool calls and like success failure when it starts and finishes, that kind of thing, like on kind of middleware inside the MCP SDK. And yeah,
Sense.
like that's the main thing. Like the rest is like almost everything should be stateless other than the sessions, like some individual tool, especially with the new tasks.
Yeah.
Um, like the tasks tool calls that are coming up, like long running stuff. Sure, it might need to be stateful. Well, it has to
Yeah.
be by nature. So then you've got to work out how to build all that, and that's like an extra layer of complexity. But um,
So the long running tool calls actually. So last question for both of you. I know we're a little bit past time. Maybe Tobin, we can start with you. That reminds me of the latest MCP spec changes coming out, I believe, in November. So I guess what are you most excited by in the new spec that's coming up?
Mhm. So there's a ton of changes coming to the spec. A lot of it are new features on the server side to unlock new capabilities. Some of it is new work on the client side to support connecting to those features, many things. Also, a few auth changes that are coming along. The two that I really love is native support for machine-to-machine credentials as an auth extension. This means that instead of using API keys, which have a lot of security issues in like big scale enterprise workload due to key management issues, you can do more robust auth, much better for enterprise use cases. And I love client ID metadata because
Hmm.
dynamic client registrations is a security vulnerability by design, allowing anyone to create an application in your service. And client ID metadata means you can do real robust whitelisting or blacklisting. It means you can at least monitor what clients are being registered and what the actual traffic of those clients looks like. So very excited for that. I don't know if
Nice.
Sam has a hot
Yeah,
take.
what do you think, Sam? What about you?
well, one that wasn't mentioned there is the OAuth scope challenge thing, which I think would be really nice because like an example being like if you're a sensitive business and you want users to just have to think about it and use discretion, you can even start with a scopeless token and then request scopes as the user actually needs them for things. So that getting baked into the spec, like again, like I think a lot of the noise that you read about is kind of from the sort of young vibe coder types and like the deep techie types, but where a lot of the money and long-term investment in MCP is coming ultimately, as it always does, is from like large enterprises, and they have totally different needs and totally different requirements. So, um, like some of these things don't sound that exciting if you're not building something that large enterprises really want to use. But when you
Yeah.
are, and like obviously GitHub has a whole like host of, like SAML using um SSO kind of like, partners and large enterprises, like that's what we need to support so that they can actually use this stuff at all. And
Yeah.
like right now, like early adopters, including in some surprising industries, like I think weirdly, because it enables really quick analysis without having to ask loads of people, sometimes financial services companies and big consultancies and stuff have been able to move faster than you might expect. Like,
Yeah.
Um,
We're finding that as well. Yeah, absolutely.
but there's adoption blockers, and I feel like scope challenge is a nice one for that because it lends itself quite naturally to kind of
Yeah.
enterprise adoption.
Makes a lot of sense. I'll give my favorite and then perhaps we can end this. So I think that long running tools is a really important one coming out because we've been looking at building agents on MCP itself. So exposing agents themselves as MCP servers. And so we have a cloud platform, MCP Cloud, that enables exactly that, where you build an agent with MCP agent and then you can kind of like deploy it as MCP servers. And we've had to go through all these hoops to kind of like model agent tool calls as long running async workflows, where, for example, for every MCP agent, we create like a start workflow, get status, kind of like a set of tools. And so having that supported as a first class primitive of MCP itself, I think really lends well to agent workflows, where I imagine in the future, Sam, like GitHub might even have, like a more complex data pipeline or some kind of like agentic kind of tool that takes a while to complete its task. And you don't want to have it block for the client just waiting until completion. So that's my personal favorite.
I agree. I will chime in just to say that we're probably one of the first, at least, like kind of major servers to have an agent to agent flow, but like it's fully asynchronous, and we just lean on the fact that GitHub Graph exists, so you've been able to assign stuff to coding agent for a while,
Yeah.
but we don't track it. Like you can see the PR and you can get progress on it by looking at that. But until we can actually let you get updates on the work log, the agent has no way of knowing how it's going yet. So super excited because we already have like asynchronous agents that are being triggered, but we're
Yeah.
missing like the whole meat of the interaction. And so yeah, like very excited to be able to tie that up finally.